Hi, this is Emil Pokarklis, the founder of iPhone Photography School, and in this video you're going to discover how to get DSLR-like control of your iPhone camera. Now, if you're a DSLR photographer, you're probably used to having full control over essential camera settings such as focus, exposure, and shutter speed, but as you're about to see in this short video, you also have control over these essential camera controls on your iPhone. But before we get started, I want you to know that I wasn't always the guy teaching thousands of people how to take outstanding photos with the iPhone. I didn't always have 93,000 followers on Instagram, and honestly, not too long ago, I didn't know much about photography myself. But as I kept working to improve my iPhone photography, I found out how to take full control of the camera of my iPhone. So in this video, you're going to discover how you too can get DSLR-like control of your iPhone camera, which will enable you to take outstanding iPhone photos that everyone adores and leave your heavy DSLR at home. Okay, so we're going to cover 3 extremely important techniques in this video. And the first technique I want to talk about is setting focus and exposure. But before we get started, I just want to show you this one photo that I took in Thailand a couple of years ago. So what you're looking at here is a traditional Buddhist ceremony in Thailand, and in this kind of event, carrying a DSLR would have been a big hassle, but I had my iPhone with me, and that's why I was able to capture this photo. And people in general think that you can't take sharp iPhone photos at night, but that is just not true. And I took this photo with iPhone 5S, which is not the latest iPhone, of course, but I could only take this photo because I set focus and exposure correctly. So right now, let me show you exactly how you can set focus and exposure on your iPhone. Okay, so right now you're looking at some flowers on a tripod in our office at iPhone Photography School. And what you can see here is that the flowers are in the foreground and they're much brighter than the office in the background. And I can take some photos, but the thing is, in this situation, I don't really know where the iPhone has set focus and whether the right parts of the flowers are going to be in focus. And I also don't have any control over exposure until I actually start adjusting it manually. And just to make sure that you always get your photo sharp and you get the kind of results you're looking for predictably, I strongly recommend that you get in the habit of setting focus and exposure in your iPhone photos. So how do you set focus? Well, actually it's really simple. All you have to do is tap your finger on the part of the image that you want to be in focus, and the iPhone will automatically set focus on that point. So right now, you can see that I've tapped my finger at my coworker's feet, actually, and you can see that the iPhone has focused on this part of the image, and you will now see that the flowers in the foreground are out of focus. So I took a photo now, and you'll see that the iPhone has refocused. And once again, I don't know where the iPhone has focused this time, but it's probably not exactly right. So if I want to adjust focus here, I definitely have to do it manually. And I can experiment with a few different options here. For example, I can focus on my coworker's feet, or I can focus on this flower here on the right. And each of these points is going to give me a totally different focus and a different image. So it's quite important that you figure out which part of the photo you want to be really sharp and set focus on that part of the image. So right now you can see I've even set focus on the trees outside the window, and that's possible too. And obviously the flowers in the foreground are totally blurred out. But what you might not know is that when you set focus with the iPhone, you're also setting exposure. So right now I've tapped on the window, and essentially the exposure is set on the window. And this essentially determines how light or dark the image is. So right now I'm going to tap my finger on the flower in the foreground again, and you're going to see that the image will immediately become a little bit darker, simply because by setting focus on the flower in the foreground, I'm also setting exposure on that point. Now what's also interesting about exposure on iPhone is that you can adjust it. So all you have to do to adjust exposure is to touch the screen with your finger and either slide your finger down, as I'm doing right now, and if you do that, the image is going to become darker and you are reducing exposure, or you can slide your finger up, and in that case, the image is going to become brighter, and that way you're increasing exposure. And this is another way you can control how dark or light your image is going to become. Okay, so right now, just to demonstrate how exposure works on the iPhone, I'm going to set focus and exposure on the chair of my coworker, which is relatively dark. And as a consequence, the entire image becomes a little bit brighter, and you can now see that the flowers in the foreground are brighter than they were before. So if I wanted to correct for that, I could. So I could actually make sure that flowers are correctly exposed, even though the focus is not set on flowers. And in that case, all I have to do now is simply swipe my finger down the screen, and you will see that the image gets darker, and now the flowers are once again properly exposed, but they're not in focus at the moment. Now obviously this is not what we want here, because the flowers are the most important part of the image. So I have to pick one flower and make sure that this one flower is in perfect focus. So I'm going to pick the flower at the top left. And once I've set focus on the flower, I'm going to slightly adjust exposure. And the general guideline with exposure is that if you're not sure, you want to expose your image to be just a tiny bit darker, because if an image is darker, you can always correct that through post-processing. But if you have any white overexposed areas, as we did before on the flowers, what's going to happen is that no information will be saved in these parts of the image, and as a consequence, there is no way you can recover detail from overexposed areas that are simply white. So to make sure that doesn't happen, and also to kind of make the background stand out less, in this image it makes more sense to decrease exposure, which is what we've done now. And now that I'm happy with exposure, I'm going to go ahead and take a photo, and you'll see what this looks like in just a moment. Okay, so here is one of the photos that we took during this demonstration, and what you can see is that the focus has been set on my coworker's feet, and the flower in the foreground is out of focus. And you can also see that the exposure is not set correctly because the flower is somewhat overexposed, meaning that it's too white. But now look carefully as I'm switching to the next photo, and what you can see now is that the flower in the foreground is in perfect focus, the exposure is beautiful, and the image has become a little bit darker, which looks nice here. And the reason I like this example so much is that what you're looking at here is just a flower in our office. And this proves that you don't have to travel far or go to some famous landmarks to do photography. If you have some flowers at home and an iPhone, you already have everything you need to take beautiful photos. But now, let me show you another photo in which adjusting exposure played a crucial role. So this is a beautiful photo I took this winter, and this photo got over 1,400 likes on Instagram. And the reason I was able to take a photo like this was because I actually adjusted exposure as I was taking this photo. So if we now look at these two photos side by side, they're taken at the exact same time from the exact same spot, but you'll see that the photo on the right is blue and very dark, whereas the photo on the left looks natural. And in the photo on the left, I actually took the time to adjust exposure manually, and in this case I had to increase exposure to make sure that the white snow actually stays white. But in the photo on the right, I didn't take the time to do this, and you can see what a big difference this made and why it's so important that you adjust exposure manually in your photos. But now, let's move on to the second technique I want to talk about, and that is locking focus and exposure. So this is the equivalent of gently pressing the shutter button on your DSLR and then framing the shot with fixed focus and exposure. So let me show you exactly how that works in a video demonstration. Okay, so right now we're looking at the same flowers in our office, and I'm going to quickly set focus and exposure for this photo. And now that I'm happy with the result, I'm going to take a photo. And what happens as I take a photo is that the iPhone automatically resets focus and exposure. So you can see that there were some changes on the screen, and now all the focus and exposure that I had set is gone simply because I took a photo. And this obviously is not perfect because I like those focus and exposure settings, and perhaps I want to take another photo, but now I have to spend a lot of time getting the settings right again. And the way you can prevent this is by locking focus and exposure. So how do you lock focus and exposure? Well, actually it's really simple. All you have to do is tap your finger on the screen of the iPhone where you want to set focus, but instead of releasing your finger, you have to hold it down on the screen for just a couple of seconds, as I'm doing it right now. And what you'll see is that this text AEAF lock is going to appear at the top of the screen, and that means you've successfully locked focus and exposure. So right now, you can go ahead and adjust exposure by swiping your finger up and down the screen, which is what I'm doing now. And once you're happy with the exposure, you can go ahead and take a photo. And what you'll see right now is that you can take a photo, and after the photo is taken, the iPhone will not reset focus and exposure. What's also interesting here is that no matter what you do, the iPhone will not reset focus. So you've effectively disabled the autofocus function of the iPhone. And as I move my hand in front of the screen, you will see that nothing happens and the focus and exposure stay just the way they were before. What I can also do is even pick up my iPhone, try to take some other photo or go somewhere else. But no matter what I do, the focus and exposure will remain unchanged. So now I've placed my iPhone back where it was before, and you'll see that still we have focus and exposure set on the flower just the way we want it to. Now, if you want to get out of this, it's pretty easy to do that. All you have to do is simply tap your finger on the screen, and the focus and exposure lock will be turned off. So this is how you set and lock focus and exposure on the iPhone. Okay, and now that you know how to lock focus and exposure, I want to show you just a couple of photos where I use this functionality. So the photo you're looking at right now is a beautiful iPhone photo I took several years ago using my iPhone 4S at the time. And no, you don't need the latest equipment in order to take great photos. Now, the trick to take photos like this is that you have to keep the lens of your iPhone extremely close to the surface of water. And in this case, actually the lens of the iPhone is just an inch above the surface of the puddle, and that's why I can create this kind of extreme reflection. Now, in this particular scene, everything was moving, and I had to lock focus, because otherwise the iPhone would reset the focus, and there would be a high chance that the focus would accidentally get set on the water in the foreground, which is really close to the lens, and then the subjects in the background would be out of focus. But since I locked focus here on my subjects in the background and also adjusted exposure, I was able to take this beautiful photo, which ended up being a beautiful print on my wall at home. And here's another similar example. This photo was also taken with iPhone 4S several years ago. And what happened here was that I saw this beautiful sunset, and I saw that the cyclist was approaching from the left. And I knew that I only had one chance to capture this photo correctly, because I don't know this person on the bicycle, and they'll be gone out of the photo in a matter of seconds. And because of that, what I ended up doing was setting and locking focus and exposure in advance so that the image would be in focus and the exposure would be correct to create this beautiful silhouette. And then when the cyclist approached from the left, all I had to do was press the shutter at the right moment, and I could know that this photo would be in perfect focus and the exposure would be correct because I had set them before. And this is why setting and locking focus and exposure is so important in iPhone photography. But now let's move on to the third technique I want to share with you today, and that is taking long exposure photos with your iPhone. Now, typically people assume that you can only take long exposure photos with a DSLR using the manual settings, but that's just not the case. So the photo you're looking at now is actually a beautiful waterfall photo I took in Iceland using my iPhone. And the trick to taking this kind of long exposure photos with the iPhone is using an app called Slow Shutter Cam. So this app costs about $2 on the App Store, but it's totally worth it. And in the following video demonstration, I'm going to show you exactly how you can use this app to take beautiful long exposure photos with your iPhone. Okay, so right now you can see that we are at this beautiful waterfall in our local city park where we're going to take some long exposure photos with the iPhone. And you will see that the iPhone is on a tripod, and this is actually a DSLR tripod, and you'll notice that the legs of the tripod are actually in the water, and I recommend that you use a steady tripod for long exposure photography, especially if you're close to water like I am, because otherwise, if your iPhone falls into the river, it's just not going to work out well. So you will notice that I've also plugged in my white Apple earbuds into the iPhone, and these are just the same headphones that you got when you first bought your iPhone. And the reason I've done this is that I can actually use the volume buttons on these earbuds to take a photo. So these volume buttons work as shutter release, and as I tap and hold the volume up or volume down buttons, the iPhone actually takes a photo. And this is really good because otherwise I would have to touch the screen of the iPhone when I'm trying to take a photo, and there would be some unnecessary movement of the iPhone, which is something I obviously don't want. But now let me show you how you can take beautiful long exposure photos using the slow shutter cam of your iPhone. Okay, so right now you're looking at the waterfall through the lens of my iPhone, and you can see that I have already opened Slow Shutter Cam app. And the first thing I want to do, and the first thing I recommend that you do when you start using this app, is press on the settings icon at the top right hand corner. And here, once you're inside settings, you have all sorts of different options to choose from. But the one I want you to pay close attention to is picture resolution. I think by default this app comes with relatively low photo resolution, but you want to make sure you set the resolution to 12 megapixels, or if you're on one of the older iPhones, you'd set it to 8 megapixels, or whatever the highest setting is on your phone. And that will ensure that you actually capture beautiful high resolution photos that are suitable for printing. Now, you can look at some of these other settings that I use. One of the things that I'd pay attention to is the volume shutter setting, which I'd try to keep on. But otherwise, feel free to play around with these settings, but make sure that you set the photo resolution to the highest option that you have available. So right now, I'm pressing done at the top right, and we're back in Slow Shutter Cam app. Now, the first thing I want to do here is to set and lock focus and exposure. Yes, you can also do this in third-party apps such as Slow Shutter Cam. Now, in waterfall photography, one of the problems that people often face is that the brightest parts of the waterfall get overexposed, and because of that, what I want to do here is set both focus and exposure on the brightest parts of the waterfall. So I'm going to simply tap my finger on the screen there, and you'll see that now both the focus and exposure are set on this point. But what I'm also going to do is lock focus and exposure, and to do that using the Slow Shutter Cam app, you need to tap the icons on the left-hand side. So first, you can see that I'm tapping the focus icon on the left-hand side, and the focus is now locked as indicated by this lock icon. And next, I am going to do the same thing for exposure. And you can see that as I tap my finger on the exposure icon, the exposure is also locked right now. So we're done with focus and exposure. And next, let's look at the shutter speed and the settings that you can use for taking slow shutter photos. So for this, I need to tap my finger at the bottom right hand corner of the screen. And here you'll see that we have 3 capture modes. We won't get into those in this video, but at night you would want to use either light trail or low light. But during daytime, motion blur is the option you want to use. Now, what's interesting about this app is that the strength of the blur is controlled not only by shutter speed, but also by the strength of the blur strength setting. And that's because this app actually simulates slow shutter speed. So technically, it doesn't take long exposure photos. Instead, it takes a whole bunch of normal photos and blends them together digitally to create really beautiful results. So for blur strength, I'm going to start by selecting medium blur strength, and definitely experiment with these settings until you find the kind of values you enjoy. But let's just start with medium. And for shutter speed, I am going to start by selecting 4 seconds. So right now, we have medium blur strength, 4-second shutter speed, and I'm going to close this window by pressing the settings icon at bottom right again. And now what we can do is press the shutter. So I don't want to touch the screen of my iPhone because I want to make sure that the iPhone doesn't move while I'm taking the long exposure photo. So I'm going to use the volume buttons on my white Apple headphones. And as I tap the volume button, you'll see that the photo is being taken. And what's interesting here is that you can literally see the long exposure photo unfolding in front of your eyes. And now that the 4 seconds have passed, you'll see that the photo is done. And I get the option to save the photo by tapping on save at the bottom of the screen. And then if I want to take one more photo, I'm going to clear capture. So now let's try this again, but this time let's try some different settings. So I'm going to tap on the capture settings again at bottom right. And this time I'm going to try selecting high blur strength, which is going to create a more blurred out photo. And I'm going to select a shutter speed of 15 seconds. So now let's take another photo and let's see what happens with these settings. So now, as I've pressed the shutter on my headphones, you can once again see the photo unfolding in front of your eyes. And I do recommend that once you find a good photo that you'd like to keep, you definitely experiment with the different exposure settings. So you might want to adjust the shutter speed and also the strength of the effect until you find a photo you like best. And once the photo is captured, all you have to do is tap save at the bottom of the screen and then clear capture so you can keep taking more photos. And this is how you use the slow shutter cam app for your iPhone to capture beautiful long exposure photos. Okay, so what you're looking at now is a photo of the waterfall that I took using the native camera app. So this is not a long exposure photo. This is the kind of photo you would get normally using your iPhone. But now, let's look at a long exposure photo. So here you can see how beautiful and smooth the water has become. And this is only possible thanks to the long exposure effect. And most people think you can only create this kind of photos using a DSLR camera, while you can in fact also do this with the iPhone using the app that I just showed you. Now you can also do this at night, and you don't need to have a waterfall to do this. So here, I've taken a beautiful photo at night, and you'll see that the water in the foreground is extremely smooth and blurred out. And that's because there were some tiny waves on the surface of water, but as I took a long exposure photo, these tiny waves turned into the smooth, beautiful looking water surface. So this is another example of how you can use long exposure photography. And finally, here's an example of a light trail photo that I took using slow shutter cam at night. And what you're looking at now is actually a highway, but since this is a long exposure photo, all you can see is the lights of the cars that were on the highway. So this is another way you can use slow shutter cam to capture beautiful long exposure photos with your iPhone. And now, before we wrap up, I wanted to give you a quick bonus tip, and that is to pretend that you're listening to music while taking photos. And the way you do this is using the volume button shutter release on your Apple headphones. So sometimes you may want to get really close to your subjects, especially if you're doing street photography or portrait photography. And in these genres, it's extremely important that the subjects don't know that you're taking a photo, or else you will not be able to capture candid moments. So here in this photo, this is a scene in New York City. And actually, I don't know these people. They are just people I saw on the streets of New York City. But I was able to get really close to them and capture this candid photo because I was using the volume button shutter release to take a photo while these people thought I was just listening to music. And that way I could get really close to them and capture this candid moment that I would not be able to capture with a DSLR camera. And here's another example, and this one is really interesting because here you can see a photographer on the streets of San Francisco selling his photography. And the interesting thing here is that this man, even though he's a photographer, he did not know that I was taking a photo of him because once again, I had my headphones on, I was pretending to be listening to music, while in fact, I was taking photos of this man, and I could get really close and take this beautiful, candid portrait photo because I was using the shutter release on my Apple headphones. And once again, this is something I would not be able to do with a DSLR camera, and I could not take a candid photo because the man would obviously know that I'm taking a photo if I was using my DSLR. So as you can see, the iPhone beats DSLR not only in terms of convenience, but also in terms of allowing you to get closer to your subjects and capture more candid photos than you would be able to take using a big camera. I hope you enjoyed the iPhone camera controls we talked about in this video. These features give you DSLR-like control of your iPhone camera, and now that you know how to use them, you can take incredible photos with your iPhone and leave your heavy DSLR at home. With that said, this is just the beginning. There's only so much I could share with you in this short video, and while I didn't hold anything back, there's so many other techniques I didn't have time to share with you today. And there's something even more important than any of the techniques we talked about. You see, the techniques we covered today are extremely powerful, but the only way to really take your iPhone photos to the next level is by changing the way you look at the world around you. Some people say they have nothing to take photos of where they live, or that the iPhone can take great photos, but none of that is actually true. There are great photo opportunities everywhere you go. You just have to know how to use them. And that's exactly why I created iPhone Photo Academy, which is the only online course that will help you take incredible iPhone photos that everyone adores and that you'll be proud to look at years later. Now, I have to warn you that iPhone Photo Academy always sells out quickly, and the registration will only stay open for a few more days. So if you want to find out more about this course, you should do it now while the registration is still open. So go ahead and click on that big yellow funny looking button below this video, and it will take you to the next page where you can learn more about iPhone Photo Academy and see if this course is a good fit for you before the registration closes in just a few days. So click on the button below, and I'll see you on the next page.